Hi, welcome back. On this episode of Cargo Garage, we're going to change the front tire skin on my motorbike. Don't forget to subscribe. The more subscribers I have, the more videos I'll make. So before I start working on things, I'm going to show you all the tools that I use to do this job. There's not too many of them, and it's everything that I use to get me by for doing a tire change. Doesn't matter if it's the front or rear, other than maybe a couple different sockets. So the first thing you need is some type of motorcycle jack to jack it up, and then to get the bike on the stand by itself, or when you're by yourself, I usually put a piece of wood underneath the kickstand, and it gets the bike a lot flatter, so I can get it right under, and then I'm not trying to balance or shake things. And I also have one more of these when I'm doing the front tire, because my bike has dual disc on the front, so instead of pulling the discs off, I just put my bead breaker on top of those pieces of wood so the discs slip underneath, and then they're not on the ground. I don't have to worry about damage them or anything like that. And then over to the smaller tools. So this is my homemade bead breaker. I'll show you how that works when we get to that stage. And then these are my tire spoons to get the skin off the rim. And then I have my can of bead sealer, because these are a tubeless tire. And then this will go between the rim when I'm popping the bead off. That's just homemade out of a piece of angle that I notched and then kind of hammered somewhat to tire shape. And then this little guy here, I use that to pull the valve stem out. I guess the core of the valve stem. So I'm able to get all the air out so you're able to break the bead. And then I just have a socket to pull the shaft out, a ratchet set up to pull the keeper out so the shaft can't come loose, and then just a regular cup and some soap, because I'll use soapy water when I'm putting the new tire on the rim, and it helps it slip on a lot easier. And then I just have a drill with a wire brush on it, or sometimes I'll just use a regular wire brush just to clean any of the old gunk off the rim. And then a little bit extra, I have some brake lube and a pair of pliers and a couple wrenches just to take off my calipers. You gotta take the calipers off, because while I have them off, I like to just grease everything up, and then I know that the pads are wearing good and they're nice and free. And one other thing I should have grabbed is a tube of grease. I always grease everything up when I have the shafts out and check the bearings and everything. So that's that. We're going to start working on getting the bike on the stand and getting the tire off, and it won't take too long. Alright, we're going to start getting the bike up on the stand. I'm just going to put my piece of wood under the kickstand. This piece is fairly thick, so it actually has the bike fairly straight up. Just make sure it's not going to tip over. Put it this side. And then when I put the stand under the bike, when I'm taking the front tire off, I'll have the stand a little bit closer to the back, so the bike is almost kind of front heavy, so when I have the tire off, the bike will just sit nice and equally balanced. And if I'm doing the rear tire, I do the opposite. I have the stand a little bit closer to the front, so then when I take the rear tire off, the bike doesn't go front heavy when I fall off the stand. So sometimes you have to put it in a couple times and check and see how the bike is balanced, but it's not too bad. When you get the bike up on the stand, you want to make sure that your stand is fully under the frame, nice and secure, because you don't want it to fall off. And you also want to make sure you don't have any brake lines or wires or anything pinched under it. That looks pretty much perfect. The back tire came off the ground a little bit before the front, and the bike kind of rocked just slightly forward, so it'll work out really nice once I get the front tire off. So I usually jack it up, and then put it into the first locking position, and then it's a lot more stable to work with too. Give it a little test shake and make sure it's solid. So now I just have a little bit of weight on the ground, so it works out good, so I can really refine if I have to get anything broke loose. So I'm on the right side of the bike right now. There's not really anything on the left side of the bike that needs to be done to loosen the axle shaft. So right here on the right, on the front of the fork, there's a little Allen key, so you just take that out. So it helps keep the shaft in place. And I just put it over on my paper. And then you just get on the axle shaft. And you start taking it out. And then before I start jacking the bike up, I'm going to take the calipers off because they don't fit past the sidewall of the tire. So you got to take the calipers off to get the tire off. The top bolt, it's too close to the reflector, and you can't actually pull it all the way out without flexing the reflector a lot. So I normally just pull it out till it hits that, and that's enough to free it up from the caliper. And same thing on the other side. And now that the caliper is off, I can just jack the bike right up and the tire will come right out from underneath it. And then the tire's out. So the reason I'm changing this tire is just wore out. You can see that I'm well past the wear bar here. There's the wear bar and I'm well past it. There's almost not even enough tread to catch your finger on it. And it started to kind of cup and get a bit of a funny shape. So I'll compare it to the new tire. It's significantly more tready. So that's the new tire. So you can do it side by side. It's definitely a big difference. There's lots of tread here where these ones there's not much left at all. So I've been running these tires for a long time. I've gone through quite a few sets of them now. I do one front tire every 2 years normally. I do one rear tire every year. And I've been running the Avons on them. And I've just switched my last tire on the rear to the chrome, Avon chrome white wall on the back. And this is my first one on the front, but it seems to be wearing a little bit better because I do like my white walls. And then one other thing that I do when I'm getting ready to do a tire change, I'll take my new tire I'm putting on a day or two before it, and I'll put wood in it to help spread it out just so it's easier to set the bead when we get to that stage. And then one thing to do when you have the bike up in the air, you should always check the bearings, make sure that they feel okay, and then check the steering knuckle bearings too. You grab one of the forks, give it a shake, make sure they're nice and tight. I've actually changed them twice on this bike now. Once when it was fairly new, around 14,000 kilometers, and then the second time I changed them around 120,000 kilometers. So, and then you also want to grab on the lower part of the forks and give those a bit of a shake. They should be nice and tight. This side feels really good, but on the left-hand side, I'm noticing a slight little bit of play in it, so that means I need to get some bushings and seals and redo the forks. So I'll put that on my list of stuff to get, but it's very minor. It's just enough to notice, but I don't want to ruin my forks or anything, so I will get those parts and replace them as soon as I can. Alright, next thing I want to do is take the core out of the valve stem and let out the air to the tire. So I take the cap off, and then I use my little valve stem remover tool. Take it out. It gets a little bit loud. And you want to make sure you kind of have your a little bit of control over it so it doesn't fly off and you have to search your garage to find it, because they will take off under pressure. And that is your valve stem core, and this tool, it just slips on like that so you can screw it out. There's some threads right on the top of it there. Threads on the top there, and that's how it works. That's how you let air out. And it's just that little guy there you're taking out. So just put it somewhere you're not going to lose it, because you will need it again. And now the next thing we're going to do is take the tire skin right off. So we're going to use the bead breaker that I made. So this is pretty simple. It's just 2 pieces of angle with 2 pieces of upright welded onto them, drilled out. This is just an old piece of metal. It's a hitch off a 63 GTO that my father used to have. And then I just have a screwdriver through here with a vice grip on the other side. I've always meant to put a bolt or something through and to be permanent, but I just never got around to it. It works good, so I just never changed anything. And then you take your tire and scooch it right on. And the reason I'm using the wood is just because it's dual disc on the front, so I don't want to have all that pressure going onto the ground on the disc. Then I just come like that. Not a bad idea to put safety glasses on in case something takes off on you. And then I just put this up on the tire. A little pressure on the tire so it doesn't slide. A little bit of bounce. And just like that. That's one side done. Now we can go to the other side. That's the exact same thing. Flip it over. And this piece, that's just piece of angle notch, so it slips on there nice. And then I just kind of flatten it off. You can always put plastic or something along your rim to protect it. Wouldn't be a bad idea. But I find if you take your time and go gentle, you should be able to. Now we use the tire spoons to take the tire skin off. So I find it's easiest with 3. With 2, you struggle a lot more, but with 3, you're able to keep one in and then use the other 2 to work your way around. And then one of mine, the hook is bent a little bit on it, so I usually use that one for my stationary once I get it started. And then the other thing you want to be conscious about when you start taking it off, you got to make sure you have the tire pushed down so it's not on the bead, because that will give it the distance that it needs to be able to slip off and work your way around. So if you have the tire up too high, then it's not slipping into the groove, and then you'll have to really fight to get the tire off. So I usually just kind of put my knees on it to hold it down, and then I just kind of come in like that with two of them. And one nice thing about it's the same method whether you're using a spoked rim with a tube inside or tubeless, but these rims are tubeless, so you don't have to worry too much when you're jamming your forks in and pulling, so there's no tube to puncture. So it makes it a little bit easier. And then you just kind of go like that. This is the one I want to use, my stationary one, so I should put that in first. Once you get to a certain point, it's pretty easy. It almost just wants to fall off on its own, which is nice. Just like that. So now we're halfway there. It's the same thing. To get the other side off, it's just a little bit trickier because now you're fighting the rotor and you're fighting the other half of the tire. One thing when I'm doing this, like on the rear for example, you're able to take the drive off of the one side and you still have the rotor on. I usually put the rotor side down and then you have a lot more room to get a lot more movement on your bars, which is nice. But same thing again, we want to keep it so the tire is in the center so it's not too high up so you have full movement. And then just get the bars in and keep going. That tire off, and now we're going to clean up the rim and then we'll start putting the new tire on. I'm going to put my safety glasses on. I usually use just a wire brush, but I have my work drills in here, so I'm just putting a wire wheel on the drill and it will make it a little bit faster. And I usually start at the valve stem. It's easy to spot, so I know when I've gone all the way around. So I'll go around one side and then the other side. And I'm just cleaning up just this contact area here, because that's where the bead will be. So you want to get as much credit off of that as possible to guarantee a nice smooth mating surface. So, I got a spare battery too. I'm at 1 bar, so I'll probably have to change the battery by the time I'm done. Now with the tire cleaned up, or the rim cleaned up, we can get a little better look. So when I was getting the tire off the rim, it'll be the same thing when I'm putting it on. You want the bead to be sitting in this groove here on the back side, and then when you're on the other side trying to get it over the rim, it allows it enough room to slip over. And then when you go and set your bead, your tire is going to get over this little lump, which will help keep it on, especially if you get low on air or something, and it will sit right in between here, nice and tight. One difference between doing a tubeless tire and a tube tire, with the tubeless tire, you don't have to, you just use soapy water, but I put the tire goop on to help with the better seal. And when you do that, it leaves a lot of residue when you go to change the tire the next time. So you want to make sure you get as much of that cleaned off. But you could just use soapy water when you set your bead, and that should be good enough. I've done that before and I haven't had any issue. But I just figure it's easier to put it on and then I don't have to worry about it. And if you're using a tube tire, you don't need to use anything other than soapy water, just help the bead slip into place. But the tube itself is what's holding the air, so you don't need to use any bead sealer or anything. But they're usually on studded or spoked rims, so you're going to want to go, and I won't have a tire off a bike right now with spokes, but the spokes will be all along here, and there'll be a rubber, so you'll want to go and just physically feel and make sure that all those spokes aren't sticking out. And you also want to go and grab them and make sure there's no loose spokes. You get loose spokes, they'll start to ruin your rim, and they'll make your bike start to go like this down the road once they start getting bad. And that's one other thing with this too. I run my hand along it and I make sure that there's no burrs or anything that could damage the tire when it goes on or affect the longevity of it before I put the new skin on. So just give it a quick little feel and double check. So next thing we're going to do is start getting the new tire on the rim. So we're going to make a soapy water concoction. So I just use this regular dish soap, anything really, any type of soap will work. And I just go fairly heavy on it. It acts as a nice lubricant. And then just a little bit of water with it. Nothing crazy. So I just do that and then stir it up. It's nice and soapy. And then as far as an applicator goes, I just use a piece of paper towel. I just fold it a couple times. Just something like that. And then you can just dip it in your cup and then apply it where you need it. And then once you get the tire on the rim, you can use that same soapy water to go around your bead on both sides and make sure that there's no pinhole leaks or anything to be able to see the bubbles coming up. If you do it with a tube tire, if you try going around it, you will see bubbles coming up, but that doesn't mean that your tube is leaking. It's just the tube still pushing the rest of the air out of the voided space in the tire. So that's a little bit different. And then the next thing we want to check on this tire, on the one side of the rim, there's some writing and part number and that kind of stuff, but there's also, it also says tire with an arrow pointing this way. So that's the direction of rotation. So we'll put that on the upside facing up so we can see that. And then on the actual tube, we'll get our little now. You go around on the side wall and there'll be an arrow for rotation. So there's an arrow right here. I don't think you can see it. Right there you can kind of see it. It's pointing that way. That's the rotation of the tire, because it does matter which way you put it on for the way the tread will work to get water and stuff out of the treads when you're riding in the rain. So you want to make sure that this arrow and the arrow on the rim match each other. And then one other thing you want to look for, these tires don't have any marking on it, but a lot of brands will put a red or yellow dot or a white dot somewhere on the tire. And that dot, depending on the brand, the best is just to look it up to see what that brand does. But that dot is usually either the heaviest part of the tire or the lightest part of the tire. So when you look it up online or through their catalog or whatever and see what that dot is. If the dot is the heaviest spot of the tire, I always put it opposite to the valve stem. And if that spot is the lightest part of the tire, I put it at the valve stem, and I figure that will help keep things balanced. That's one thing I haven't had to do yet. I leave the factory weights on the rim, and I've never had to get a tire balanced, but we'll talk about that more towards the end of the video. Now we'll get our rim back up on our wood. And then we'll find a rotation arrow. Right here, it's pointing this way. So we can see both arrows, they're both pointing this way, so the tire is going on the rim appropriately. So now, I can grab my soapy water. And I can lather it up. I do one side at a time. It just helps it slip on without damaging it. Otherwise you can kind of tear the rubber. Alright, there's one side on, and this side will be the exact same. And I use my tools the same way as I use them on the other one. On the other tire, you just get that on the rim and force it in. And if there was a dot on the tire, now would be your best time to try to reline it up where you want it. Because when you get the other side on, you can still spin it, but it starts to get a little bit stiffer. And always double check your rotation one last time, because you never want to be off on that, because you have to pull the tire rate off again. So I'll put some more lubrication on this side now. A nice little soapy water. And we'll slide the rim kind of back. And you may need to use your tool just to start to get the tire into that groove where you want it. So kind of like when I took it off, I used my knees to keep the tire in position, and then we can start going around and getting it on. And I do find that this side goes on easier than the first side. The first side I find sometimes when you start to put it on, the tire starts to pop off again, where this side you have the other part of the tire holding it in place, and that seems to make it a little bit easier. But you still want to make sure you keep your pressure on the tire. As you can see now, it's a lot harder to move. So our next step now, I usually try to dry up the water on there so then I can put my bead sealer on. I just like to get the water off just so I know that the two probably don't react very well with each other. So I'm going to get a clean rake to wipe that down. Now I'm going to put my bead sealer all the way around. So I just push down on the tire so I can get it right on the tire itself on the bead. I try to avoid getting it on the blue part where the white wall is, just because it's a bit of a pain to clean off after. But it's also really hard not to get any on there, unfortunately. I never seem to do it without getting it on. I usually go fairly heavy with it. I figure you can never have too much. So this, when it dries, is almost like a rubber, but it also acts as a lubricant when you're trying to get the tire in place, kind of like how your soapy water acts as a lubricant. This acts the same way, but then has a rubbery drying finish to it, which helps seal any air pockets or anywhere where the air can get out of the tire. Alright, that's one side. So let me just take the tire and flip it around. And now we can get the other side. Alright, that's all the way around. So now we're able to put our valve core back in. And then same thing, just use your little tool to thread it back in snug. You don't need a reef on it or anything. And now we can start putting our air in. If you go to start putting your air in and you have trouble, balance on the top of the tire. And if that doesn't work, take a ratchet strap and go all the way around the outside of the tire and reef it down to try to bulge it out, and that will help. I'm just going to get hooked on here. It's a little bit difficult to get in here. It's doable. And you want to make sure you keep your fingers clear. So I always fingers up like that when I'm pushing on the tire or anything. Because when that bead sets, it could cut your finger off. It has a pretty good wall up and it is a little bit loud. You can see right here it's not on all the way yet, so we got to give it more air to snap that bead in place. You can hear it go right there. So now I'm going to overfill it to make sure that bead's set good to about 50 to 60 pounds, and then I'll take the air back out and go around 32 pounds. Alright, so that's overfilled now, and the reason you overfill it is to really set that bead and get it to overextend almost, just slightly, and then immediately take the air back out. And again, be careful not to lose your stem, or your core, I mean. So now all the air is out, we're going to put our core back in. And I like to give it a quick inspection and make sure that there's no air in it, that's still holding. This way you know you're on the bead good. That's one thing with motorcycles, your life rides on your tires. So you want to make sure that they're good. And now I'm going to fill it up to about 32 psi. That's what the bike's spec'd at, and it seems to handle nice, so I just keep it at the specs. Right about there should be good. And wipe up any excess goop. Now I'll take my soapy water and just put it along the bead. And just check for any air bubbles. I'll do that on both sides. And when you put the soapy water on, there'll be bubbles just because there's bubbles in the soap. But if there's a leak in the rim, you'll see a spot bubbling up. Alright, I got the wheel all cleaned up. It's looking pretty nice. I'm gonna get ready to start slipping it back on the bike. And I've checked the bearings on it too. And the bearings feel good still. Alright, so now we want to get the tire back on and in place. So you want to make sure that you have the right rotation. So you look on the side of the tire, the arrow is right here pointing this way. And when the bike's moving forward, the tire is going to rotate clockwise. So it's set in the right orientation. So now we can start getting our keepers and our spacers and our axle shaft and everything back in. I like to clean all this stuff up as I go. And I'll clean both sides. So I just put a little bit of grease inside the rubbers and inside the axle. And I also put some grease on both sides of the spacers for the front axle. You want to make sure you have no dirt or anything in it, because that could eat away the rubbers. Adding a little extra resistance. You want to make sure that your hands and everything are nice and clean. The grease also helps to hold things in place. And now we'll start lowering things down and getting them closer to actual ride height. So we're really close right there. So now we'll get the shaft in, give it a quick wipe down, make sure it's clean. And then we'll put some more grease on it. And also check your shaft for wear, especially where the bearings sit. Because if you do see wear there, your bearings probably need to be changed. So as you can see, that looks perfect. So it looks new, there's not even a hint of wear on it. I put a little bit of grease on. And now I'm threading it into the other side of the floor, and it should really go relatively easy. Alright, now we're going to torque the front axle. I grabbed my service manual so I have the actual torque spec. So for the axle, it is 78 Newton meters or 56 foot-pounds. So I'm going to grab my torque wrench at the quick type and we'll go 56, but we'll start lower than that. So on this one we'll start at 30, that's the lowest setting. That was 30. Now we'll go to 45. Now we'll go to 50. And now we'll go to 56. Alright, so that axle is torqued to spec. And now we're going to put our retainer bolt back in. Just clean some of the gunk off of it quickly. And it's supposed to be set, the axle pinch, it's supposed to be set to 20 Newton meters or 14 foot-pounds. So my big torque wrench doesn't do that low, and then my smaller 3/8 drive torque wrench, it's in inch-pounds. So it also has the Newton meters on the backside, but if yours doesn't, it's just a multiplier of 12. So you take your 14 foot-pounds and then multiply that by 12, because there's 12 inches in a foot. So since you're going foot-pounds to inch-pounds, just gotta multiply by 12. So just go 14 times 12, and that gives you 168 inch-pounds. So I'm just going to start at 70, seems like, or inch-pounds, 70 seems like a good spot to start. And then we'll just keep upping it. Perfect, and that's good. Next thing we're going to do is check and clean the brakes and get those connected, and then we're ready to put her down and go for a ride. I'm gonna just clean my brakes up a little bit. So I'm gonna pull the pads out, lube up the adjusters, and just kind of give them a quick clean. So to pull the pads out, on the back side, there's a pin that goes all the way through. So you just pull the keepers out and then you can pull the pads out. You just need a pair of pliers, makes it easiest. And then there's a little tensioner spring in there. So you just want to make sure you keep everything oriented in the right direction and remember which pad came from where. So right now I can check the pads. They look excellent. The pads were changed, I think it was around 80 something thousand kilometers. I'm up to 134, almost 135,000. So they both look good still. They're good for a long time yet. I'm just kind of compressing the pistons right now. Just make sure that they're not starting to seize in place or anything. So when I do get on the bike to drive again, I'm going to have to pump the brakes up and build up the brake pressure again, just to be safe. I'm just going to put a little bit of brake lube on them too. On these spring keepers, there is a right way and wrong way. There's a little arrow on the back. Once you clean it up, you can see it, and that arrow points up. So it's going to go back on like that. And you put a little bit of lube on the back side of this as well. And then this is the pin that the brake pads slide on. So they'll be on there like that. And then as you apply the brakes and they wear, they keep working their way on further. So you want to make sure that this is cleaned up nice and smooth so they can slide nice and easy. Otherwise they may start to bind. And then if that happens, one of them might get stuck and not slide any further and wear all the pad on the other one. So we'll put a lot of lube on that just to make sure things move freely. Then we'll take a clean paper towel and we're going to spray our pads with brake cleaner and just wipe them off and get any old residue off. That will help make the brake pads work better, and it will also help if you have any squeaks or anything in them. It will help to get rid of that. Now we're able to start getting our brake pads and everything back into the caliper. You want to try not to touch the actual pad surface, especially if your hands start getting dirty. It just slips kind of in. And you can kind of get your tensioner on. The other pad in. You find if you hold it flat like that, it keeps them in place a little better. And then you take your keeper and put that in. And once you get that pin all the way through, There's your two holes where your little keepers go in, and you just slip them back in. Now your caliper is all back together. And then we're going to do the same thing that we did on the brake pads. We're going to put some brake cleaner on a paper towel, and we're going to hold it on the rotor, and we're going to spin, and we're going to clean any dirt or debris off of it. And this will help to give you better braking and a better feel on the brake itself too, and get all the dirt and crud off. As you can see, it was pretty dirty, so I'll do it one more time using the back side. Yeah, it turned out a lot cleaner that time. So now we can slip our brakes in, or caliper in, I should say. And you want to make sure you have these bolts tight enough, because you don't want your brakes to come loose when you're on the road. Alright, so that side's done. We're going to move over to the other side. It's the exact same thing. Alright, I got the brakes all done. I just want to do a quick demonstration of why after you do your brakes or you clean them, if you spread the pistons out, why you have to pump the brakes up hard. So I'll give the tire a quick little spin, and I hit the brakes, and nothing happens. You gotta pump them up. And now they're starting to grab a bit, a little harder. There we go, now there's some feedback on the brake pedal, or on the brake lever. You can hear it grab now. So if you didn't pump them up and you go to start riding and then you go to stop, come up to the corner or something, you'll have no brakes. For that took about 15 pumps to actually get some real feedback on them. So just keep that in mind when you do brakes, whether it's front or back, motorcycle, car, truck, four-wheeler. Always make sure you pump them up and have pedal pressure before you start moving your vehicle. Alright, the front wheels all changed, there's no leaks, brakes are cleaned up and re-lubricated. Now we can get it up off the stand, which is nice, and then I will take it for a ride and make sure there's no vibration. If there's any excessive vibration, you have to pull the tire off and balance it. Alright, pull the tire off the bike and leave it on the rim. So it's not too bad. If you have spoke rims, you always have the option of pulling the tire out, putting the axle through it, finding where the heavy spot is, and then putting wraps of solid wire on the other, on the light side, and it will be able to balance it out that way. It might take a few tries, but you can do it like that. I've always seemed to be lucky. And when I go and when I do take it for a ride, I always start off easy and make sure everything feels okay. And then I will pick the speed up and bring it up to more of a passing speed, and make sure that there's no vibrations at the higher speeds that you see in a passing situation. And then I call it good after that. One thing I'd like to mention too, when you change your tires, there's always the film on them right from the tire plant. So you should break your tires in for about 160 kilometers or about 100 miles. So don't start pushing them real hard in the corners right away, kind of work them in a little bit. And if it's rainy out, be a little extra careful, because it's kind of like a greasy film almost. So if it's, especially if it's split out and you go in a corner hard, the bike might just slide out even though it has brand new tires on it. So just keep that in mind. So I usually just start out nice and gradual. If the roads are dry, you can kind of bob side to side and wear off the coating a little bit quicker that way before you really start pushing them to their limits. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, just leave a comment and I'll respond back. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. I'm hoping to, once I get over 100 subscribers, maybe get some shirts made up and try to get some shirts up to some people. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Have a great night.